Hi everyone, we're live today on this month's Teach the Web Talk, where we're going to be talking about advocacy, which change.org. If this is your first time joining the talk, this is live on Google Hangouts, and if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat on the event page. We're also taking questions on Twitter, so please tweet us your questions with the hashtag #TeachTheWeb. We're running a discourse page where we'll post all the questions or links that we'll post all the links post-call that we discussed today, and we'll also be keeping the conversation going after the call, so feel free to drop in. The link is also on the events page. As you know already, we turn these talks into podcasts, so please subscribe, and once again, the link is on the events page. Today, I am your host, Sarah Allen, and I'm joined by Lucy. Hi. Lucy, hi. I'm based in the UK and I work for Mozilla on the Learning Networks.
I am based in Canada. And I.
So today's focus, we're going to be talking about advocacy. So we hear about this term in our everyday lives. It's a word that I hear a lot in my work from my friends and in everyday conversation. But when I was researching for this call, I was like, what does this actually mean? So did a bit of soul searching, also a bit of research with some dictionaries, and the English Oxford Dictionary explains advocacy as public support for or recommendation of particular cause or policy. Further reading highlights such words as defends, empowerment, access, and support. How I describe advocacy personally and how I feel relates to me as a representative, someone who's speaking on my behalf, someone who's championing a cause and being a voice for someone who cannot be heard. But how do we get people to listen to our cause? How do we advocate? Today's Teach the Web talk is with change.org, who are the world's largest petition platform, empowering people everywhere to create change they want to see. Today we're going to be talking to John and Teresa, and they're going to be advocating on our behalf, or rather they're going to show us how we can build momentum and movement for our ideas online. Welcome, guys. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hey, thank you guys so much for having me. So my name is John Perry, and I'm Associate Director of Campaigns at Change.org. And thanks, Sarah. And I've been here since 2011. I work in our San Francisco office. My background is in criminal justice campaigning and drug policy reform work. I have been working on campaigns here for the last almost 4 years and have helped a number of people with starting petitions, helping to empower them to tell their stories to our users. Probably one of the biggest ones was helping the parents of Trayvon Martin mobilize about 2.2 million people to call for justice for their son here in the US. And before joining the team here, I was at an organization called Students for Sensible Drug Policy, where I was focused on helping students learn how to change drug laws, like reforming marijuana policies, legalizing medical marijuana, and things along those lines.
Hi, I'm Teresa. I have been at Change.org for actually 3 years to the day. I work on the comms team, and I work very closely with John and other folks on the campaign staff here to tell the story of Change.org users to the media, and we help support them in using media as a tool for escalating their campaigns. The theory behind that is that the more press you get on an issue, the more people who are sort of engaging in the campaign that you have launched, and the more that the decision maker knows that a lot of people are joining your movement. Before I came to Change.org, I was working in the LGBT movement. I worked at the organization that was formerly known as the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, and I was also on their comms team doing work that is similar to what I do now, but more specifically focused on LGBT advocacy.
Thanks, guys. Welcome, both of you, to today's talk. What impressive backgrounds you come with. We're delighted to have you. We always start our calls with a few icebreakers, just a few silly questions for us to get us into the talking mood. So the first one that we have today is, what is the silliest petition that you have ever seen? Who would like to take that first?
I can take this one. This petition I actually just saw a few days ago, and it was started by a very excited and engaged Beyonce, Rihanna, and Nicki Minaj fan. The petition calls for those three pop stars to record a full-length feature album together because that person believes that it's just a thing that the world wants that needs to happen really, really soon.
I want that, and I want to sign that petition. And if you just send me that link, I will be signing that petition.
Will do.
Perfect. While I'm unmuted, I will share mine. It's not so much strictly a petition, and I think some of you maybe already know about this, but I was excited to find out that it hadn't made its way across the ocean. The Kickstarter campaign that asked people to give money, which is a kind of vote, for potato salad creation, which raised about $55,000 for someone who wanted to make potato salad. I think the line they used was, "I want to make potato salad, but I don't know what kind yet." And $55,000 were donated. And apparently no one in the UK knew about this hilarious Kickstarter movement. So that's definitely my favorite.
I know, I was shocked when I heard about it. It sounds like a great initiative, and $55,000 towards coleslaw, essentially coleslaw. I'm dying to try it. So I remember reading about a petition, and it resonates with me because I always have this issue, but it was started by a woman in the UK, and it was to get rid of cap locks. And the reasoning behind it was like, nothing is more frustrating than you're halfway through an email and realize that you've just written the top half in cap locks. So we can get rid of the button and then just be fine. And that would be the petition I would be willing to give my signature to. I think that's a great cause.
I can support that one as well. But so we also had last year, we had a petition that pretty much went viral around the show Family Guy. And it was after the dog Brian was killed in an episode. Somebody started a petition asking for Brian to be brought back to life, which I think somewhere over 100,000 people signed that petition, just being sent and shared all over the internet. Just kind of one of those really fun things. The show did end up bringing him back, which is pretty cool.
I was just about to ask. I was like, I'm pretty sure you can rewrite history with cartoons, so.
I wonder if it's just because it's missing. They had a whole storyline without him, and they were like, no, 100,000 people want him back, bring him back.
I haven't watched Family Guy in a long time, but Brian was one of my favorites, so that's a good petition. Our next question is, if you could start a petition on change.org, what would it be for? I'm going to give this one to Lucy to start us off.
I didn't think about this one very hard beforehand, and I'm still stuck in the silly petition idea. So I think it would probably be to probably be something to do with pancakes, and about maybe trying to make pancakes to make poutine Canada's national food. Because right now it's like, I don't know what our national food is, but I don't even know if we have a national food. But so it would be that we should have a national food, and it should be poutine, and that it should have a holiday that everyone gets off, a bank holiday, and poutine is required.
I think everyone already thinks it's poutine, so you're good there.
All I need is the bank holiday.
I'll sign that petition for you. I've never tried poutine, but I hear only wonderful things. Shariza, do you want to give this one a go?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have to agree with the sentiment from before. I would also sign the Beyonce, Rihanna, Nicki Minaj petition because I am a big Beyonce fan, as John knows. If I had to start a petition, it would probably be a fairly targeted petition at one of my coworkers who refuses to state that New York City pizza is in fact way better than Chicago pizza. So I think what I would really do is petition the entire state of Chicago so that they would maybe admit that their pizza is not pizza, but that it's more like a tomato casserole.
Strong words. Surely there's a taste test required with this one also.
I think New York City pizza wins sort of hands down.
I'm going to take your word for it. I've never tried the Chicago version, but I have tried the New York version, and it is delicious. John, how about you?
So there's a bus line near my house that has so many stops and goes so slow, but it pretty much brings me from my house right to my office, but I never take it because it's so slow. There's so many stops. There's actually an annual run here in San Francisco where people race this bus and beat it because it just goes so slow. This one line, it's a really great line though. So I would start a petition asking for fewer stops or a version of the bus that is sort of like a rapid or express, version of it that goes a little bit faster and stops a little bit less.
Just cuts that little bit that like where all the traffic sits. Nice. So mine's a little, I guess I did think about mine today, and it's kind of topical from me being an Irish person. I would start a petition in support of the Yes campaign in Ireland. I don't know if many people are aware, but tomorrow Ireland goes for referendum to vote to legalise gay marriage in Ireland. And I am Irish, but I've been out of the country for nearly 5 years, so I don't have the right to vote anymore. So I would like to start a petition for the Yes campaign, showing my support and asking Irish people around the world who can't have their voice being heard, but they can be heard through this petition. So a serious but poignant note to finish on that one.
That's so much better than the poutine one. Now I feel like an asshole.
But just as valid. Everybody has to have something they need to petition for. Okay, so let's jump into the heart of the conversation, and today we are talking about advocacy. So my first question to both of you, John or Shariza, whoever wants to take it, can you tell us how Change.org got started, how you got involved, and what exactly it is, for those of us who don't know?
I can take that one. So Change.org was actually started in 2007 by our founder, Ben Rattray, and his friend from college, Mark Demas. And they wanted to create a platform that enabled folks to, use tech for social good. And so in its initial years, they kind of tried a bunch of different things. They tried online fundraising. They tried to use the site to be a vehicle through which people could do volunteer work. And it wasn't until a big campaign in 2010 that the idea of a petition platform really took off. And it started with the story of Ndumi Funda, who is a lesbian from Cape Town, South Africa. She started a petition that called on the South African government to put into action laws that would put a stop to corrective rape, which is a practice that is archaic and really obviously terrible. And she got a lot of attention for her petition that really started taking off globally. I believe it had about 175,000 signatures by the time it won, when the South African government said, "We're listening, we're going to put a stop to corrective rape in our nation." That was when the light sort of went off for Ben and for Mark, and they said, this is what we're here for. We want to put tools into the hands of people across the globe that will make it possible for folks to make decision makers listen to their concerns, a platform through which people can really build movements, not just for themselves locally, but nationally and even globally, like it did in the case of Ndumi. And so that is the origin story of Change.org. We are an open, neutral platform where anyone, anywhere can come to start a petition about things that they care about. And we see petitions started about pretty much any issue you can think of, and often during really important moments in the world, we see our users reacting and using Change.org as a tool to respond. So for example, after the migrant ship sank in the Mediterranean, moments after the news broke, there were multiple petitions on the site calling for measures from the European governments to do something about, protecting the lives of people who are using these ships to get to safety or to get to another country where they can kind of live their lives more safely. So yeah, change.org is, our vision is that we want everyone everywhere to be able to take matters into their own hands and use the tools that we provide to make that change happen.
Incredible. I love the kind of the beginning story. The guys wanted to create something for social innovation, and they tried loads of different platforms and just looking for the right one that would make that connection. And then through this story, that it kind of sparked this ignite, this idea. It's really incredible.
I had a question because hearing that story, which I've actually never heard before, it's like a really powerful story. It seems like making advocacy and change accessible is a big part of kind of what change.org does, and I wanted to dive into that idea a little bit more of like accessible advocacy. So my question is, how does change.org make advocacy accessible? And maybe you could even walk us through how hard or simple it is to create a petition on change.org.
Sure. Great question. I mean, really the whole goal of our platform is to get this tool into the hands of people who haven't had something like this before. And really, until our platform came along, this tool for campaigning hasn't been easily accessible. So really the whole goal is to make it as easy as possible for anyone to quickly start a petition about any issue that is important to them. And it helps these people get their message out to signers. It helps them speak directly to people who can help them make this change. Ultimately, it allows people to reach a larger community than they ever really could before. So most of the people who are starting petitions on the site, they're not actually activists, and they haven't actually, it's not their career or their background isn't in advocacy work. So something just happened to them, or they read something that inspired them to take action. And our platform makes it very easy to start this. If you go to change.org and click on the Start a Petition button, you'll see that there's really just 3 steps in order to start one. You need to know who you're going to petition. You're going to need to know what you want them to do, and you're going to need to give some sort of background and explanation about why this is important, and tell people why this is important. So we do that really in just 3 steps, making it incredibly easy for people to take advantage of this. At the end of the day, we're really just trying to put tools that create change in everyone's hands and allow everyday people who don't necessarily think of themselves as activists to have the opportunity to voice their concerns directly to decision makers, which is what we call, anyone who a petition is targeting is ultimately the decision maker here, and use that to rally people locally, nationally, globally, however they need to amplify their voices.
I think it stems back to my point as well, Shireen's made as well. It's like the local to global, and that's where you get the support of numbers. That's an incredibly strong point.
I think to what you were saying how and what you were saying about how global is really interesting. We often see that an issue that starts in one country can inspire action in another country. So, for example, a few years ago, there was a very successful campaign in the United Kingdom to get, I believe it was Jane Eyre on banknotes. And that campaign won. And it inspired US folks to start petitions on their own as well, because there are no women on our money either. And so we kind of see that where one petition takes off in one country and wins, folks hear about it and then they decide to take that matter into their own hands, albeit with a little bit of local flavor, but it's very much the kind of thing where one person's action can really spark someone else's action. And that's one of the most exciting things to see like John said, people don't necessarily think of themselves as activists, but when they see themselves in the story and in the issue, they're really compelled to do something about it. And I think that's the beauty of organizing generally, but also of online organizing as well.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like there's almost like an online learning component where people are learning from the different campaigns that they're looking at, or and you mentioned there's kind of a community. You've mentioned that once or twice, like our community, and I wanted to just dive into that a little bit more. Who is the community of change.org? And like, are they just kind of anyone who sees a petition? Are they regular users? Can you tell us a little more about the change.org community and what that means, and you think how they learn from each other?
Well, internationally, I mean, I think we're about to hit 100 million users at this point. So we're growing incredibly fast, and I think it's really hard to put any sort of label on community as a whole. I mean, I think that these, aside from the fact that I think all of these people are people who are interested in participating in some sort of social change, right? They're definitely wanting to hear about the stories that people are telling through our platform, and using that to become inspired to take some sort of action. They're usually people who want to help in some way, whatever it is that's important to them. So I think that that's sort of the larger community, and then there's definitely big pockets of people who care about specific issues. And I think a lot of people will sign lots of petitions on broad ranges of things, and then you'll see people who come back to the platform to sign petitions about more specific issues: criminal justice reform, gay rights, women's rights, animals, lots of different stuff. So, and we're seeing that I think people are becoming, one, inspired to start their own petitions, particularly at the local level. A good example of this here in the United States would be something like body cameras for police officers, which is cameras that will record police officer interactions with civilians. It's become a very hot topic here after a few incidents of police misconduct. And so what we have on our site, which I think really plays into inspiring people and then helping people to learn to become advocates for things they support, we created these pages called wildfire pages. So we had one really big petition about body cameras, and through an update that went out from the starter of that large petition, they sent people to a wildfire page, which gives them a template where they can start a petition of their own to their local police department or their state legislature or their city government, asking them to implement policies around body cameras. And we saw, I think, over 100 petitions be started at the local level from that. And it's a really great example of people inspiring one another and learning from one another on how to become advocates.
That's really cool. Really cool. And I see this as something that our community is going to have a big use for. I think a lot of the people in kind of the web maker and the Teach the Web community have things that they're really passionate about, whether it's net neutrality or it's just web literacy. There's so many causes wrapped up in that. And I see a lot of people who maybe haven't heard of change.org before this talk, or have seen a petition but didn't know how to get started, being interested. And so my big question is, what makes a really effective advocacy campaign? And I know that there's probably an online component and an offline component, and I wonder if you guys could talk us through kind of what makes those really outstanding campaigns.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think the biggest thing that we always talk about before we talk about anything else when we're talking about successful petitions is that the best campaigns are campaigns that have a personal story from someone who is directly impacted by the issue. So we are very lucky in that we often see these amazing stories about issues in gay rights or issues in food sustainability, which can feel like really big issues to tackle, right? Like, you can start talking about issues to the point where you stop seeing the faces that are affected by them. And what a campaign with a story really does is it kind of grounds people in knowing exactly what the change on the table can really do, not just for laws or not just for corporations, but for people. And so I think that's probably the the core piece of a successful campaign, is a person who's directly connected to the issue, who is looking to tell their story to get other people to, join their campaign. The other thing that's really important is having a campaign that is sort of possible and winnable. So for example, if you've got a campaign about a local ordinance and you are targeting President Obama, that probably doesn't make sense, because you want to be requesting something of a decision maker who can actually make the change for you. Or for example, something that's really not specific at all. So calling on, I don't know, the Pope to end world hunger is not a campaign that's winnable, right? You want to chip away at big issues with little asks, or smaller, more systemic asks that can actually kind of get you to move the needle on big issues. Some other items are things like, making sure that the story ties into something that reporters or the press are generally interested in. And then I think a lot of what makes a campaign really strong is the amount to which a starter is engaged. So is the petition starter sharing it on his or her social networks? Is the petition starter updating people when some sort of news or some sort of update comes in on the petition? Is the starter, being really active on social media and reaching out to thought leaders or politicians, or maybe even celebrities, to get word out on the petition and also to sort of get support from these people? I think those are sort of the main points that can really help a campaign go from something that's getting, just one signature to something that's getting hundreds of signatures.
So it's very much starting also like a social media campaign. You talked about there, starting as the individual with the individual story, and then trying to decide who you're petitioning to, and how do you decide that? It's a personal. You're starting to petition for something that's quite personal. You've seen it take place on a global scale, and you've seen that it's really, really worked. And so, let's also talk about net neutrality. That's what happens in the US, but now that's happening. They have the same questions in India. So how do they take what happened in the US and make it more local? How do they decide who they're going to petition? Because, like you said, they can't. There's no way they can petition Obama. So are they thinking that they're going to petition their own president in their own country? Do you have any guidelines around those for people?
Sure. So there's a really fantastic tips and guides section on change.org, so you can just find it off the homepage, and there's some really great resources there for understanding, what goes into either researching and figuring out who is going to be the person that you want to petition. Ultimately, it sort of lays at the feet of the petition creator, whoever's creating this, and sort of their responsibility to figure out exactly who they need to petition here. So sometimes, in a lot of cases, that can be a little bit unclear, and it takes a little bit of research to figure out who you need to direct your petition or your campaign to. Other times it's very, very obvious. There's a clear decision maker. Maybe it's a bill in Congress or through your country's legislature, and you need to target those folks. Or it's something that you want, for example, President Obama to do around issuing an executive order. Some of those things are a little bit more clear. Other times it just takes a little bit of work to dive in and figure out who's the best person or organization or company to petition.
And I guess staying as well with the local idea, all the examples we kind of talked about in the last 5 minutes, where we talk about Congress and Obama, I think, if it's a local issue, then I guess you need to look for the next logical step within your own community. So whether that's a teacher in a school, depending on what you're trying to petition against, or your own local government council. I guess it's like just kind of stay close to home to start off. It's good to dream big with petitions, but for it to gain traction, I think it must speak to the people in your local community as well.
Yeah, and I think there's also a ton of power and influence there when people can bring campaigns locally. They have much more power than I think they realize they do for a number of reasons. But I mean, once you're starting a petition to your local city council, and you can do petition is really just a component of a larger campaign usually. So if there's something you want your city council or your local government to do, starting petitions is a really great way to mobilize people within your community and to catch the attention of those decision makers, and then also to have those people in one place where you can mobilize them to do other things, like go to that city council meeting and maybe bring all your petition signatures, or be there to give public comments about the issue that's being discussed, or go to a rally or a protest. It provides this really central location to take things even more locally, both online and offline. And then it actually can make a pretty big splash. You know, you're a big fish in a small pond rather than a small fish in the ocean. So that's a really good thing that I think a lot of people tend to overlook. It's a great reason why we have the wildfire campaigning tool, because we want to help people understand that they have a lot of power at the local level, and there's a really great way, an easy way for them to take advantage of that.
I love that you touched on some of the offline things that people can do, especially in local communities, like actually attending meetings. And I've made a petition, and I know you can print it off and like walk in to meetings or to your city councilor with like a list of names. You mentioned the wildfire tool that I'm not familiar with, and I wondered if you could just maybe explain what that is a little bit more.
Sure. So what the wildfire tool does is, if you take an issue, we could use something like the police body cameras for an example, and you break that down to the local level. See, most of the time, the decision makers around this issue are going to either be the local police departments, or it's going to be your local city council. And this could apply to lots and lots of other issues, environmental regulations, all sorts of things. You know, bottled water bans, or plastic bans, plastic bag bans, things like that, where you have a lot of petitions around the same issue. So we have these pages, which we call wildfire, because it sort of represents this idea of these campaigns spreading throughout the country, but at a local level. The petitions all have the same ask, right? It's to like have police adopt body cameras, or it's for cities to ban plastic bag use, but they're all targeting different people, because they're started by someone in San Francisco, or someone in Los Angeles, or someone in New York, and they're asking their bodies and their bodies of government and their representatives to take those sort of actions. So you have this one page where you can find all of those petitions started at the different local levels. There's an aggregate signature count at the top of the page, which is really great, because it shows you how many people have taken action on a similar issue all around the country or all around the world. You could do these globally with issues as well. And then another really cool feature about that is on that index page of those petitions, you'll see a Start a Petition button, which allows you to start your own petition, gives you a bit of a template to work with. So some really clear instructions on how to start a petition on that issue particularly. And once you get it started, it's going to be added to that page alongside all these other ones. So kind of creates this wildfire sense of campaigning, and connects people with one another from around the country or around the world.
So it really allows like a vast collection of people to campaign for a very similar issue, but joining together, you know, so we're having separate campaigns, but joined together in a great force. How do you think online platforms like Change.org connect to the openness?
I'm sorry, connect to...
Sorry, my microphone's not great. How do you think online platforms like Change.org connect to openness? So the idea that we're all working in the open and as one.
Yeah, so it's funny that you use the word openness, because we use it all of the time to describe ourselves. And I think both of the definitions of openness kind of work together. So Change.org, like I said, is an open platform. So anyone, anywhere can come to the site to start a petition on something that they care about. And oftentimes we see people starting petitions about one issue, but on opposite sides of the issue. And I think that's an important part of what change.org offers, because it gives a voice to many different people, and it provides tools across the board to all of these people. So like you said, we're all doing this work in public. We all don't share the same opinions. And so I think, you know, change.org and online organizing sort of becomes like a microcosm of what we see in the world generally. So debates happen on change.org, and that's important. That's what allows us all to kind of talk through what our differences are and come, hopefully, to an agreement on, you know, the really big things that are affecting all of us and impacting our world. So I would say change.org's openness allows us to do this work bigger, or allows people who use the site to do this work in bigger ways than ever before, because you're not just reaching people who agree with you, you're reaching people who you might be moving them toward your opinion. And so I think it really is a vehicle through which people can start a dialogue that reaches folks not only locally but also globally, and I think that's really exciting.
I love you tapped. Oh, echo. I was just loving the idea of interconnectedness and the capacity to reach so many people. And I think this is such like an exciting tool and such an exciting platform. I know you touched on some of the things that people do when they're doing really successful campaigns, and you also touched on some of the mistakes people make, like not being specific enough in who they're targeting. I wondered if you had an example of a campaign that was really successful, because I think probably there's a critical mass that you get to, and like once you've got a certain number of people involved and sharing, it gets big really quickly. I wonder if you had any examples, especially any that maybe are good models that people could follow.
So we have two examples actually. Shariza, did you want to start off talking with Jahaz? So we have one that sort of has a bit of global impact, and then one that's pretty focused here in the U.S. on legislation, but both are really great campaign examples. So I'll let Shariza talk about Jahaz first.
Sure. So I talked earlier about how one campaign can inspire another campaign, and one of my all-time favorite campaigns are about female genital mutilation, which I know is a really difficult thing for us to talk about, especially in the US. It's hard for journalists to really jump in, and I think the two campaigns that I'm about to speak about really provide an example of how storytelling is an immensely important part of successful campaigning. So these petitions started in the United Kingdom. Fama Mohammed, a 17-year-old British girl, started a petition calling on the Secretary of Education, Michael Gove, to make it mandatory, school to school, across the United Kingdom, that teachers who have young girls in their classrooms who they know are from countries that practice female genital mutilation and whose families take them to these countries for a vacation, that these teachers talk to students about cutting and talk to these students about what it means for them to make the personal decision to not let anyone else make that decision for them. Fama's campaign went bonkers in the United Kingdom. She got the attention of activists who had been doing this kind of work for years. She got the attention of UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. She got the attention of Malala. Her campaign was immensely moving, and like I said, it won. And her story inspired the petition starter who I've probably worked with the most closely in my time here at change.org, who started her own version of a campaign in the United States. So hers, again, was specific to the US. Her ask was, President Obama, please ask for a nationwide study on how FGM affects women in the United States, how many people have been affected by it, how many women are in danger of undergoing the procedure, all of that, because that study had not been done in 20 years, and the data was out of date, and it needed to be updated so that services provided to these women could, serve them as best as possible. Jaha started her petition and she won it, but a lot went into that. She spoke to politicians on Capitol Hill. She also was connected to folks at the United Nations, including the Secretary General, who endorsed her campaign. She did some work locally in her own community in Atlanta and talked to people on the ground in her community who are from the Gambia, who, kind of support this practice, but they heard her story. They heard how she's living with the emotional and physical effects of FGM to this day. And she, I think, is a really special example of someone who came to the site and started a petition because she was really personally impacted by this thing that she wants to change. But what she did and what she, the kind of person that she is now, is that she became an advocate. She's still doing this work. She won her campaign, and she's teaching other young girls how to do the same thing in their communities in the US, but also abroad. She is a mentor to a girl in Kenya who is taking on FGM in her local community. And so I'm just kind of floored by how FAMA's campaign in the United Kingdom inspired Jaha to take on this issue that it's very easy for Americans to ignore. We can easily say, that's not my problem. It doesn't happen to me in my backyard. Why is this an issue at all? Jaha put a face to an issue that people get squeamish around. I mean, that's the honest truth, is that it's not easy to talk about FGM. And she made a difference, and she made a difference, and she didn't stop there. And I think, again, we've been repeating this again and again, but that's the beauty of change.org, right? Or online organizing generally. It puts power in the hands of people who don't necessarily think that they can do something that is culture changing. And Jaha did it, and she's still doing it. And like I said, she's continuing to inspire people around the globe with her story. And I just think it's really incredible to see that kind of work spark such a huge movement.
What an incredible story. It's overwhelming, and for a young person to go so far with this, it's really, really inspiring. Really, really inspiring. You mentioned there that she won, but when I think of other kind of advocacy campaigns that you do, like, is winning necessarily the end goal? Because I know that you petition against certain legislation or you want things to change, but sometimes is gaining traction and gaining interest in your story winning as well?
Yeah, I think change.org petition starters are the owners of what victory means. And so they determine when they decide to declare victory. And I think victory can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes it's not that, President Obama changes the thing that you asked him to change. Maybe it's that he or someone else higher up who's influential makes some sort of shift that helps you get a little closer. Again, it's always up to the petition starter to define what winning means for them. But yeah, I think there's definitely big moments in the escalation of a campaign that are moments that should be celebrated and moments that are, victories in their own right. So yeah, definitely. We've seen petition starters declare victory on things that didn't get all the way to the ask but got super close or made a big dent in making change.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Excellent. I figured it out. I just wanted to chime in and say that story, the story you told, was also really incredible. I was like, oh my God. And I think it's really inspiring to hear how a platform like change.org can have that impact and how it can change, not only have an impact on like governments and policies, but on the people who start the petitions themselves, about how she kind of became an activist through that. So that's really cool. So one last kind of practical question about for people who are maybe going to start their first campaign. Are there any like really big pitfalls to avoid, like kind of top three mistakes where you're like, oh, I can see this is a good cause, but this isn't going to work or anything? If you could caution people.
Sure. So there, I mean, there's a lot of things. We could go back to our joke about the all caps button and getting rid of that. But certainly, petition length is a big thing. You really some people have so much information to tell and so many really amazing points to make about the campaign, and I think it's somewhat difficult to not just put all of those into one petition, right? And so you have sometimes petition texts that are just pages long, and unfortunately, what ends up happening there is people don't end up reading the whole thing, or they just feel like there's a problem, maybe too much investment to put into figuring that out, or they're just not seeing the really key points of that petition when they think about signing it. So writing petitions that are a bit shorter and concise and trying to really boil down your most important points and most compelling points is one of the most important things you can do with writing your petition, and really trying to avoid the lengthy petition text, because you need to get people hooked as early on as you can when they're reading this. And then, beyond that, I think the other big things to avoid doing, especially when you have a lot of like, let's say you have a petition up and running, and there's a lot of people signing it, not updating those people. We have a really great feature on every petition that allows you to actually send an email to everyone who signed your petition. So you could give them updates on the news around the campaign. You could ask them to call the petition target or to take another sort of action, just like sharing the petition. If you don't utilize that, and there's just sort of radio silence for months and months, or possibly even longer, people will become disengaged in your campaign, and you're going to lose a lot of momentum that you had. So that's another big pitfall to avoid.
I think you made some really, really strong points that can be used in petitions online on change.org, but also offline as well. That kind of like continuing to talk about your message and reach out to those people. I think we mentioned earlier on around links, but it'd be really great if before we end the call that we get some of those links to those pitfalls that people can avoid, and we can put them up on our Google Hangout page and on our discourse page for people to use again. That'd be really cool if we could do that. Remind me to do that before the end of the call. So we're coming to the end of our call. It's been so compelling and inspiring listening to everything that you guys have been talking about. But I'm going to ask another difficult question. So do you know of a campaign, and maybe this is more to John, because I think, Sharita, you kind of told us already, but what change.org campaign has had the biggest effect on you?
I think there's been so many that have had a lot of really important and inspiring effects on me, and it's really hard to pull just one. But there's one that actually just won pretty recently, and it was passing a piece of landmark disability rights legislation here in the U.S. And it's really just been one of the most inspiring campaigns I've ever seen. It's around passage of a bill called the ABLE Act, which stood for Achieving a Better Life Experience Act. It allowed people with disabilities to have tax-free savings accounts so that they can save for their futures, live more independent lives without fear of losing disability benefits. So here in the U.S., a lot of people are dependent on that who have disabilities, or it helps them to live more independent lives with costs of things like transportation or medical. And but once people started to actually work and save up some of their own money, they were at risk of losing the disability support that they needed to also, continue living that independent life. And where this was hitting people the most was in the Down syndrome community, where I think you're seeing lots of people with Down syndrome live much more independent lives. They're getting jobs. Some of them are starting their own businesses. They're getting married. They're driving cars. A lot of things that a couple decades ago they weren't quite doing. And so it's really great that we had this woman named Sarah Wolf who started a petition in support of this bill. Sarah actually has Down syndrome, and to the best of our knowledge was the first person to start a petition on our site with Down syndrome. And she was petitioning the U.S. Congress to pass this piece of legislation. She got almost 300,000 people to sign it. She testified before the U.S. Senate. And the bill ended up becoming the most popular bill in Congress last year, with almost the entire Congress supporting it, about 404 representatives and 77 U.S. senators, including our both majority and minority leaders in the House and the Senate. We also had some really fantastic engagement with members of Congress through the actual platform. So Change.org has something called Decision Makers. And this is a tool that allows verified members of Congress or companies to actually, when they're being petitioned, to respond to that petition and engage in a dialogue between the starter and the signers. So it creates this bridge that is really one of the most important things. Sarah's petition got 4 responses from members of Congress, which was really fantastic. 2 from the Senate, 2 from the House, as well as 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So it was really this balanced, sort of fantastic way for people to engage on this issue. So the bill was passed overwhelmingly last year. It was signed into law, and no short part because of all the hard work that Sarah Wolf did, both with her petition, with her work with the National Down Syndrome Society, of which she's a board member, and where she has done a lot of the campaigning and sort of grassroots lobbying work. And she just sort of used our platform to tell the story about, at the end of the day, what is really kind of, it's a piece of like tax reform legislation. And she was able to tell her personal story and get about 300,000 people to sign a petition, inform them about how this impacts people with disabilities, and pass landmark disability rights legislation. So for me, that's really just been one of the biggest and most inspiring campaigns that I've had a pleasure of working with.
That's so incredible, and another inspiring story, and I think that's probably the word for today's talk is inspiring. Great stories and so much great information, and it really does make things so accessible. So I'm sure everyone who's listening to the podcast or watching this is as ramped up and inspired as we are, and thinking, how can they get involved? How can they support these campaigns, change.org? What can people do?
Well, the first thing would be heading to change.org and checking out our homepage, which features all of our victories and also some of the campaigns that are what we call trending, either by signatures or attention in the press, things like that. And then to the side of the homepage is a list of some of the most popular topics on the site, and you can always click through those and see, what's happening in an issue that really matters to you. And then lastly, John did mention how easy it is to start your own petition. So clicking that big red button that says Start a Petition is another good way to start getting involved.
And what we talked about today, it can be started on absolutely anything, from Nicki Minaj and Beyonce getting together and to making major changes within legislation. Thank you both so much for joining us today on our Teach the Web talk. We highly enjoyed it and are ultimately inspired and compelled to start some rallying support around different activations in our own groups. So thank you for joining us. And thanks for everyone who watched us live and will be listening to the podcast. I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thanks, folks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.